Welcome to another episode of the DD Geopolitics Show. I'm your host, Yara. I'm here with the one and only Sarah today. And of course, our special guest today is Hala Jaber. She is our good friend. She's a Lebanese-British journalist and a regular expert on our spaces on X. She also currently writes for the Sunday Times, and she was awarded the Amnesty International Journalist of the Year Award in 2003. She also won Foreign Correspondent of the Year at the British Press Awards in 2005 and 2006 for her coverage of the Iraq War. And her first book, Hezbollah, Born with a Vengeance, was published in 1997, and it describes the rise in the political agenda of Hezbollah against the background of Lebanese history from 1970 to 1997. So we'll be definitely touching on this throughout the segment. Welcome, Hala, how are you doing?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm doing fine, and I hope you ladies are too. And I will look forward to this session with you guys.
Thank you so much. So let's jump right in here with the first question. Your book, Hezbollah, explores the history and the rise of Hezbollah, as we know. So can you tell us a little bit about how the organization has evolved since then, and how do you perceive its current role in the region?
I mean, first, let's simplify it. Hezbollah came about or grew or was born as a result of the Israeli invasion in Lebanon in 1982. So if you want, the inception was because of that. Initially, it was a resistance group that included several. They started all before 1982. They all started, well, during 1982, they all started as a Lebanese resistance. And Hezbollah then started preparing for its own initiative, which actually they declared in 1985. So officially the group came about in 1985 when they declared their manifesto and they declared that they are Hezbollah. And their whole ethos was about defending Lebanon, but also to resist against the occupation. Israel had invaded Lebanon in 1982. And it was supposed to be during Ariel Sharon's era. It was supposed to be a brief invasion to tackle what they refer to as the Palestinian problem in Lebanon, quote unquote Israeli terms. But then it ended up actually driving throughout Lebanon and into the capital, Beirut. Lebanon was occupied for several months. Beirut was occupied for several months. And it was actually under siege, etc., etc. And then so Hezbollah happened, resistance started in 1982 and Hezbollah came about in 1985. Like I said, the main reason is to resist the occupation and drive them out. It started as a small resistance compared to today anyway, with very little means, but with men that believe that they had the right to defend and they had the right to resist. And it grew over the years. It made mistakes, like anybody does, but they had an ability, if you want, to assess, to look at their mistakes, to learn, and to readjust and to evolve. And that's why they've become now a power to be reckoned with and a deterrence to Israel.
Thank you so much. And just in your experience as a foreign correspondent, can you tell us a little bit how your reporting on maybe similar movements has influenced your kind of broader understanding of the Middle East and conflicts in the Middle East?
I mean, if I've learned anything over the years is no army, no matter how large or how strong, can actually occupy a country and not have resistance. And every country that is occupied has a resistance. Nobody agrees, for somebody else to just come and take a piece of the land. If we look at, like I said, I was there from its inception, if you want, and watched the growth and the evolution of Hezbollah. But then after that, also in Iraq, I saw similarities happening in Iraq as well, when the Americans came and invaded and occupied with the coalition. And you started having groups on the ground, various factions from various sects, also developing themselves or growing into resistance. And then you had the resistance in Iraq that are under various factions as well. But they have one main goal, which is to drive the Americans or the occupation at the time out of Iraq. Now, I mean, Palestinians have always been resisting pre-Hezbollah and pre-everybody, because, historically Palestinian land has been taken, and historically they were fighting to regain their territories and also to have a country of their own. So Palestinian histories over the year has seen various forms and shapes of resistance under various factions and under various groups. And then Hamas started happening as well. I mean, then you had the Intifada number 1, Intifada number 2. Hamas was actually a group that was initially supported and even aided and financed by the Israelis themselves in order to counter the PA, and because Israel did not want to have did not want to have a Palestinian state, full stop, and definitely did not want the PA to be strong. So they've had Hamas, but when things got bad and Hamas decided that it needs to turn into to have a wing, if you want, a proper resistance wing, Hamas came about, and Hamas is just an acronym for the name, but. The point is also most of these resisting groups in the region, and what now is known as the axis of resistance, they have also up to a large point they have modeled themselves around Hezbollah's growth and model. So Hamas over the years has been engaged with Hezbollah. They have coordinated, they have worked together, they have exchanged information, ideas, experiences, technology, support, and so on and so forth. So all these groups now look up to Hezbollah, if you want, as the godfather, the model, that the father that we look up to, and they're also trying to develop themselves into that kind of force, and Hamas now has grown into a force also to be reckoned with. I've lost your.
It's actually
okay.
me.
Okay.
So we've seen a gradual escalation between IOF and Hezbollah on the southern Lebanese border. I think we actually have a video from yesterday. If Aria has that queued up, we can show it. This is just something that Hezbollah released themselves. Then excuse the watermark. See if he can get it up here. So what we do know is that they've taken out the sensors on the border and kind of destroyed Israel's vision, or eyes, as they've said, that we've taken away their eyes. We do know that Hezbollah has a lot of artillery and a great ordnance bank, but at what capacity are they currently operating right now? We know that they're not operating at a full capacity, but is there like a percentage of, like, maybe they're operating at 25% of their actual ground operations capacity? How much have we seen from them in this specific conflict, and what can you tell us about those escalations at the border, and maybe where they will go and how they could potentially shape the entire situation in that particular region?
I'm not even sure that they've used 25% of their capacity. I think they're, if I think I'm going to be generous and say, maybe we've seen 10% of the capacity. There's a lot that Hezbollah is not declaring. There's a lot it's not using. It's too early to use, and it's not putting its cards on the table right from the beginning. This war could drag on for a long time. And at the moment, there is no full what people refer to as an all-out war between Lebanon, between Hezbollah and Israel. But there is a war ongoing since the 8th of October, and it is basically around areas that are close to the border, North Israel, close to the southern border of Lebanon. It is using artillery, up to a certain distance. It is not using. I mean, it's got air defense, it's got naval defense, it's got long range defense, it's got precision missiles, it's got supersonic missiles. It's got quite a few things, and even they sometimes have shown in the little videos that they make, in the videos that they make, they've shown little, they've tantalized by showing little things here and there to suggest or to say that, if you were to launch a full war against Lebanon and against Hezbollah, we do have the capacity to respond. Yes, you have the power when it comes to your F-16s and your tanks, because those are things that Hezbollah does not have, and not even the Lebanese army does. And we'll come to that in a second. But we have the ability to actually defend ourselves from your F-16s and from the Navy if they wanted to shell or to bomb Lebanon. And we have missiles that can go far deep into Israel, and they've been very open about it in interviews. Sayyid Nasrallah has always said, how far deep they can go, and that they can reach, Haifa and beyond Haifa. That was his famous statement at the time. So these are all messages that they actually exchange between them. Not directly, obviously, but through statements. There's always, military messages going back and forth between the two sides. And each side now has, after years of being at war with each other, they've developed this, if you want, this psyche of understanding what the messaging mean and what each side is trying to tell the other. At the moment, I think the situation is as is, and I don't see it at the moment expanding beyond, as in there's no all-out war between the two sides. I don't think Israel wants that. It will not be able to deal with a second front. It does not want a second front, and definitely Hezbollah does not want. I don't think anybody in the world really, if you look at them or ask them, do you want to go to war? They'd say no, preferably not. But if push comes to shove, if Israel was to attack Lebanon, as in carry out a major preemptive strike, then definitely Hezbollah will have to defend itself and the country and declare a full-on war. But for the time being, it's actually, when you think about it, since they started to now, they're averaging between 10 and 15 or 16 attacks against the Israeli against the Israeli positions across the border from Lebanon. And they've concentrated mostly on military targets. So Hezbollah is not out there to kill civilians just for the hell of killing civilians. Most of what they've been doing are most of their attacks, if not 99, well, I would say 99%, has been against the military. And yes, initially the surveillance, the towers, the spying, the devices, the everything that will allow Israel to monitor that border even more, because they were able to monitor every movement in that border. So these were very vital for Hezbollah to take down, so that their fighters can move safer and to more forward positions without being detected. And if need be, if they needed to, which they haven't, but if they needed to cross as well without being detected. So, but when it comes to what they've been using, they really haven't used the let's say the big numbers that they have, and I don't think they will be using them just yet. And there's no need at the moment. They've been satisfied because they've been getting, the rockets they've been using or the shells they've been using against tanks, or the artillery they've been using is actually doing the job that they wanted to do now, or for now.
Thank you so much. And based on that, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there are conflicting reports about the number of deaths. So we have unconfirmed numbers right now floating around between the 500 to 1,000 mark. But I've heard reports of up to 3,000 IOF soldiers now neutralized. Whereas on Hezbollah's side, I've seen a much lower number, so around the 70 or so. So we know that obviously the clashes have been very intense, but the numbers of casualties on the IOF side, they seem to be strategically missing from the mainstream media. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, I just before we came on as well, I think it was Al Jazeera that put out that the Israeli the IDF had has informed the families of Israelis. It's informed 392 families of their losses, and I'm assuming. The way it was worded, I'm assuming that those are what Israel is declaring as soldiers and officers that have fallen. These are mainly in Gaza. These are numbers that actually Hamas fighters have killed in Gaza in combat with the Israeli soldiers, whether it's face-to-face combat or close-quarter combat, or whether it's attacking their positions and their tanks and buildings that they're holding up in. I think, personally, I think the numbers, and we've seen this in the past from previous wars, Israel has a tendency not to declare immediately all the numbers, and they trickle them slowly on a daily basis. But we've come up with this formula basically, whereby usually whatever they declare, one tends to multiply by 4 or 5 or 3, between 3 and 5, and that gives us a rough idea of what the total numbers are. Before we came on your space, I think there was a Palestinian from Jerusalem who said he was listening to the news. I think it was Channel 12, and somebody was saying that the numbers at the moment, soldiers killed, is running. It's running about 3,000 and about 15,000 injured. But that's what he heard. But whoever was saying that, an Israeli obviously was saying that, but they said that they couldn't say more and they could get into trouble for declaring these numbers. Now, one of the reasons also they don't declare big numbers is because it would impact the morale of the soldiers that are on the front line and that they're having to send in. And remember, a lot of these guys are young guys. They're reservists, and they're going basically into foreign territory. Gaza is very unknown to them. They don't know the ins and outs of it like Hamas does, and so the whole thing is quite daunting, if you want. But I expect those numbers to be much higher from the Lebanese side as well. They're not declaring. They're declaring very little numbers, but I don't know what the latest numbers are. But again, we are watching videos that are being put out by both Hamas and by Hezbollah on a daily basis. If you want an end of the day account of the attacks that they've carried out, and you are seeing visually, basically. I mean, just before I came on, I was watching something somebody sent me that happened today or yesterday, but they put them out usually a few hours later or by the following day, and you're seeing Hamas fighters literally, up to a tank, and then they hit the tank, and they either partially destroy it or totally destroy it. Now, there are people in the tanks, and Israel is not telling us what injuries or whether they've incurred deaths in those. There were other videos where you actually saw them attacking from a bit of a distance, attacking soldiers on the ground, because they're monitoring them and they see them and then they attack them, and you see soldiers falling down, getting killed. Again, we don't know how much of all this Israel is putting out, but we know for sure they're not showing these videos in their own space. I mean, people would, even Israelis, if they went into the Telegram channels, they would see them, but this is not something that they usually sort of broadcast or brag about.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the ceasefire and the conflict. We know that obviously there was this recent ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. I'd love to know from you, Hala, how do you perceive the agreement, particularly regarding the exchange of hostages? So there have been a little bit of contradicting reports about how long these actual exchanges would take, and seems pretty clear that Israel is going to be dragging out this process. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but as far as I understand it, the family members of the deceased are allowed to essentially say, no, I don't agree with these hostages, which are, by the way, Palestinian women and children, to be exchanged. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you perceive this whole ceasefire right now? Yeah.
Okay, well, to interpret the ceasefire, let's go back to the original declarations that Netanyahu did. His aims, his goals for the attack that he carried out in Gaza. Obviously, first was to avenge the attack that happened in the enclaves around Gaza. But his main goal was to discover, and free the hostages that Hamas and other groups, because everyone talks about Hamas and the hostages, but people forget that there are several Palestinian groups. Sure, Hamas is the largest group there, but it doesn't hold all the hostages. Other groups also hold smaller numbers of hostages. Either way, Netanyahu declared that his main goal was to free and retrieve the hostages or prisoners, and second, to defeat and liquidize and eradicate the presence of Hamas. Hamas, if you look back again, literally from within the first few days after the first attack, after they broke the barrier and did the incursion into the enclave, literally within days, Hamas said, roughly there are about 200 point something hostages that we and other groups are holding. And the deal we want is we're happy to release them all, as a wholesale package in one go, in return for every Palestinian, and we mean every Palestinian prisoner, man, woman, child, held in all Israeli prison, and there's thousands of them. And they gave another option, if you want, we're happy to do this exchange in stages. So we will release some, you will release some for as long as it takes. But this was offered to Israel literally within days of, so we're talking for the first week, so we're talking 5 weeks ago. Netanyahu rejected the deal or ignored it, but definitely didn't go, and went ahead believing that he can achieve his goals without having to go through this process, so as not to look like he's curbed, he's given into Hamas's conditions. He's destroyed Gaza, or a large sector of it. He's killed over 15,000 people, mainly women and children. He's orphaned kids. He's eradicated entire families, that are from, families of 70 and 80 members of various generations, totally eradicated, totally wiped out, that they had to be removed from the data registry, okay? He's turned it into a rubble, into an uninhabitable place, and he's found not a single hostage or prisoner yet. He's got no intelligence about their whereabouts. And he has not defeated Hamas, that continues with an ability to fire rockets to this day against the enclave and further into Israel up to Tel Aviv. So after 6 weeks of this entire attack, with many war crimes committed on the part of Israel, Netanyahu suddenly went back to the original deal that Hamas offered him and said, okay, let's exchange. And now we've got this process, which is Gaza will be given 4 or 5 days of what we call day-to-day humanitarian truce. It's not a ceasefire, it's a truce. So for the next 4 or 5 days, there will be a truce whereby neither side will be fighting or attacking each other. Israeli drones will have to stop. People will be allowed to move back in to go and check on their homes, whatever is left of those. So from south to north, a movement is allowed. These are the conditions that were laid out and agreed. And huge amounts of humanitarian supplies allowed into Gaza, fuel, and Hamas will release 50 of the hostages, which are mainly women and children under the age of 19. In return, Israel will release 150 women and children, Palestinians, under the age of 19. You see, many people also believe that just Hamas took hostages for the sake of it, or took prisoners for the sake of it. Aside from those that follow the news and are part of the region, but in the Western world, people woke up to the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian story and the Palestinian cause now. They don't know a lot of the background, that Israel actually has been imprisoning children, women, for no crime, with no legal representation, no trials, and they can sit for years in prison, rotting away basically. So this was also one of the factors that eventually pushed Hamas to take these prisoners back to Gaza in order, because precedent has shown that the only way to retrieve your prisoner is to do an exchange, and to do an exchange you need to have prisoners to do so. So after all these weeks, after Hamas offering them right from the beginning this offer that they rejected, 6 weeks later, despite being on the ground for the last 3 or 4 weeks, Israel's come out with nothing and had to go back to Hamas's original deal and agree it. And at least they're going for the partial one, where it's going to be in bits rather than the whole number. But what does that mean? That means that, and Hamas has really made no concessions. What has it done? It's exactly what it offered them right from day one. So, and as far as Hamas is concerned, it's made no concession. It's won on this point. And as far as Israel is concerned, this is actually not a victory. On the contrary, it's a loss for it, because it's showing that, after everything you've done, and considering that you're the biggest, the strongest army, and you were going to wipe out Hamas, within days and get your hostages, you failed to do any of that. So you have to go back and agree to their terms. And this is the stage that we're at now.
You kind of answered my next question in a way, which was fine, but because I feel the same way about this ceasefire. I think that it's a victory for the resistance coalition. I also, exactly what you said, I'm glad you brought it up about how they've made no concessions on the side of Hamas. Israel has agreed to everything that they put out in the beginning, which is further proof that this ceasefire is actually a victory for the resistance. But on the other
one more thing. Also, they broke Netanyahu's resolve, and as far as he always said, there will be no fuel. I will not allow fuel to enter Gaza. I will not allow supplies to enter Gaza. Even on these two issues, he's had to relent, and fuel will be entering Gaza, and humanitarian aid will be entering Gaza. So in effect, like I said, again, Hamas has made no concession whatsoever. It is Netanyahu that has had to agree to their terms and to concede to certain things.
I absolutely 100% agree. But now I want, and I know you will as well, to reflect on the past ceasefires that have gone into place in Gaza and between Israel and the resistance forces. And Israel doesn't have the greatest track record with ceasefires. When we were in the space last night, and I literally said to one of my friends, I said, hey, I have good news and I have bad news. And it's the same news. There's a ceasefire. So it's like, well, while there's a reprieve for the Palestinians, and thankful for that there will allegedly be no more sorties over Gaza, doesn't this ceasefire work to the Israelis' advantage? Also taking into consideration that Israel will bomb up until the last minute aggressively until the ceasefire takes hold. And how long do you think the ceasefire will last? And will Israel observe this ceasefire? While the conditions of the ceasefire being met are advantageous to Hamas and the resistance, doesn't this give Israel more time to kind of soften the image, kind of regroup and rearm, and maybe try to take hold of the narrative that they've lost? Actually, you know what? Scratch that. I don't want to get into that because we're going to do journalism later. But doesn't this ceasefire kind of play into, doesn't this work to Israel's advantage? And what do you think is going to be the climate leading up to the ceasefire and during?
Okay, again, if we go past experience, people would say, what's your source? The easiest way to answer that, Israel's history in the past. That is my source. Israel will bomb the hell out of Gaza between tonight and tomorrow 10 a.m. if that's when the ceasefire starts, or 1 minute before 10 a.m. That's what they usually do. We can predict that they do that because they've done that on every occasion. Will the ceasefire last? Well, before that, you said, it's a reprieve. Who benefits from it? I think both sides, up to a point, benefit from it. Israel desperately need to regroup and to reassess and perhaps to replan how they're going to tackle the next stage of this war. For many Palestinians, we're talking about 1.7 internally displaced Palestinians. That is no small feat in a very small enclave. So you've moved 1.7 people. Gaza is very small anyway, and you've moved them further into a much smaller geographical space. They also need to breathe. They've not had the chance to get out properly, to resupply. Many had to leave their homes with nothing more than their, the clothes they had on their backs. Temperatures are changing. It's getting wet. It's getting wintry. It's getting cold. They need food supplies. They need water supplies. They need lots of things. So and they can't do it when they're under attack, when they're constantly under attack. So the 4 days will also allow for the Palestinian people to breathe. It will also allow for Hamas to breathe, because any military cannot sustain this for days and weeks on end at the level that it's been. It's relentless. So from each side, it will allow them. Now, one can argue that this is not a great thing because Israel will have time to regroup replan its stage. But at least for the civilians, which is very important. On the other hand, also for Hamas, they may be able to regroup. But also, I know people have been saying, what if Israel breaks it tomorrow? Well, our understanding is not all hostages are going to be released in one pack. So over 4 days, we have 50 that will be released, or 50 that they've claimed that they've announced that will be released. They're going to do them in batches. So every day, a number of Israelis that are being held by Hamas and other groups will be released in return for a number from the 150. So they're doing them like this. So every day, something will be released in return for the other side. Now, if Israel breaks this truce, I'm not calling it a ceasefire because it's a truce. Then it ends there. The rest of the hostages that are still being held will not be freed, and vice versa. So I don't think it's in either side's interest to break the next 4 days truce, because each side wants to achieve at least, from the Palestinian side, they would like to get these women and children out. And from the Israeli side, they would like to even give to their society a victory of sorts, and having released 50 women and children who are also under, they're being under attack because of the situation in Gaza. They've been, Hamas, from what our understanding is from the statements they've made, they're trying to keep them safe, but there has been from Hamas's declaration about 50 or 60 of them that have been killed during the bombings. And again, not all hostages are being held by Hamas. Some are being held by smaller groups, and therefore may not be held in necessarily in the safest of places. So they are as vulnerable as the next Palestinian civilian in there when they're under attack. So a house they're being kept in could get bombed and they get killed. So this is also why you see that, Israel in the last few days found 2 bodies around the Shifa hospital, and Hamas had declared these 2 that they died, and they found one in the rubble, I think, or in a building, and another one in another, I think it was near Shifa hospital, and previously they found one under the rubble. So I don't see that it's going to be beneficial for either side at the moment to break this truce. Now, Israel has also said if everything works out in the next 4 days, as in everything goes smoothly according to the plan, they may be happy to extend it for another few days in order to get more prisoners. So we would have 50 from the youngest to the 19 age, and then you go a little bit further with the ages to get more prisoners out, more hostages out. There is a batch that's being held that are military, pure soldiers, officers. Those at the moment are not part of this equation. At the moment, the equation is civilians, I believe.
So I'll just ask it anyway, since we're still on the topic. We actually discussed this last night. We're entering into a holiday in the United States. So today, tomorrow, Friday, and the weekend is sort of a holiday here, Thanksgiving. For our
happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
I don't celebrate it, but for the people that might not know, Thanksgiving is a very family-centric holiday where we always like to joke and say that's where the family fights start, and that's where all the current news is kind of discussed. And somebody brought a really good point up last night. They said Israel is really losing the information war here. In America, they are losing it even on our mainstream media. And someone brought up the point that because they are losing so badly, losing the narrative and losing in the press and in terms of international opinion, that they strategically placed this ceasefire across the holiday to kind of be like, oh, thank God the conflict in Palestine has died down over the Thanksgiving holiday kind of thing. And while that's kind of like, oh, do you think that could be a possibility that now, while the ceasefire's gone, Israel could use this as a strategic way to kind of like hit the pause button, try to get their narrative back together? I don't think that they will, but do you think that there's some sort of truth to that?
I mean, I don't know. I can't talk on behalf of the Americans or the Israelis, but I can see why, even the United States politicians and president would not want this issue being dragged over, like you said, over Thanksgiving, which as you say is huge in the US. And they don't want news of more attacks, deaths, destruction, and people blaming they want a little bit of a break from it all, and especially over this period, which is similar to Christmas, but it's ahead of Christmas, but it's another, it's the first Christmas in the States, if you want. So I can understand that. I mean, as far as the Israelis are concerned, I don't see how that's happening unless they've been pressured into it, because I don't think in Israel, they're celebrating Thanksgiving there. But the thing is, it's crazy if that's one of the reasons or one of the factors that has actually brought this to happen now, within this period of time where it's either it's a coincidence or it's intentional happening around the Thanksgiving. You see, if it is, then it's actually pretty sad that for their own Thanksgiving celebration, so it shows that they have the ability to stop a war when and if they want. But because it's their own celebration, they can do that now. But if it wasn't, they're happy to let it go. So I still sometimes try and believe that there is humanity somewhere, and I'd like to think, not be that cynical to think that that's the reason for it.
Humanity doesn't exist in Israel.
I know. I would really like to. No, not in Israel.
The reason why I also bring it up is because these sort of proxy states have started adopting our holidays. So I think maybe because there's a huge contingent of American and Israeli dual citizens, that holiday is also celebrated in Israel. It's also celebrated in Ukraine. So it kind of gives you an idea of these proxy states and how they do take our holidays into consideration when deciding what they do. I mean, Ukraine has done multiple times where they've done arms or done fire breaks and other things for our holidays. It's very, very bizarre. And because we know how irrational and ridiculous Israel is, that's why I didn't put it past them. And I decided to ask the question, because I'm like, they're crazy enough to take this into consideration. So that's why.
Well, even so, then that's a very sad day that on account of that, they're willing to stop a war. So really on any other day, Palestinian lives does not matter. Palestinian do not matter. They can go and bomb them anytime they want, but God forbid, they need to sit around the table and have some turkey. God forbid on that day this is happening. So let's freeze the war, put it on the shelf for a few days until we have our celebration, and then go back to killing them.
Correct.
I mean, whichever, if you look at it that way, it's actually even, I mean, when I say it's horrifying, I shouldn't be surprised, because the whole 6 weeks has been horrifying. But the good thing also that's come out of this, yes, at a very high price to the Palestinian, but let's be frank here. Israel's image has been damaged beyond repair for the time being. It's going to take a long time for it to be repaired. They've come across as, they used to be the victims, now they're the oppressors. The people that were victimized in their history have now turned to victimizing. They've recreated another Holocaust. During the Holocaust, countries would say, but we didn't know what's happening. Well, now we all know, because we're watching it live on our TVs. It's in real time, and we can't turn our heads and say, oh, but we didn't know, because we do know. So those countries are responsible for what's going on. But so Israel's image and the West has been shattered as, they're inhumane, basically. The barbarity of it, the Israeli might, we are the most invincible army in the world. That's been shattered. When you look at it, at the end of the day, you're talking about a bunch of guerrillas, I mean, and no, I don't mean it in any offensive way, but we have a way sometimes in Arabic, in a jokey way, where we want to describe them, say, people with slippers and tennis shoes, basically, a bunch like that has taken on the might of the Israeli military and has held them, has held forth for the last 6 weeks. They've not been defeated. So that's saying something about Hamas, but it's also saying something about the might of the Israeli army. Their humanity has been shattered. Their credibility has been shattered. I mean, look at all those PR videos. I mean, the third-rated audios and videos they've been doing. Their intelligence services were shattered on October 7th when, that breach happened, and they were unaware of the whole thing. So when you look at it, Israel has been, it's not just military. Even if they were to win this war military, whichever way you define that win or victory, they really haven't won. They've lost a lot, because they say they're the most moral army in the world. I mean, that sentence alone, freaks someone out, because what they've proven to be is the most immoral army in the world, with the way they've been bombing civilians. They've had politicians come out and describe Palestinians as, dehumanize them as animals and lower than animals. They've called on eradicating them. They've called on nuking them. They've called, yesterday there was, former security, oh God, my head, former national security head who ran an op-ed in a major Israeli paper, saying, it will be better, people, the humanitarian organization, the world is worrying about the creation of, epidemics and diseases in Gaza. Well, actually, we shouldn't shy away from that. That's a good thing. We can get rid of most of them that way without engaging our soldiers or losing our soldiers. Let them die that way. I mean, who calls for that?
Hala,
who calls for that?
There was the former Israeli Interior Minister that just 10 hours ago said, after we turn Khan Yunis into a soccer field, we need to take advantage of the destruction to tell the countries that each of them should take a quota. It can be 20 or 50K. We need all 2 million to leave. That's the solution for Gaza. I mean, how is it possible that they are so openly and brazenly calling for the elimination, the destruction of all of Gaza and all its citizens? I mean, how is this possible in today's media?
It's possible because Israel has always been the spoiled child of the West, on account of the historic injustice and the Holocaust that happened against the Jews, if you want, because that's what it was at the time. Because of that, and because the world was late in getting its head together and getting together to save them. But this has been held against the rest of the world, and Israel uses it and uses the victim card anytime, and every time it needs it, it uses this card as, we're the victims here and people are after us and we're going to go through another. Well, hold on a second. The world has been paying that debt forever since then, and I think that debt has been paid, and Israel is no longer the victim, despite that card that it tried to dangle in front of everybody. Israel has now turned from the victim and to the oppressor. And by the way, let's differentiate. We're not talking here about the Jews themselves. We're talking about the Zionists that make or that form most of what Israel is as a state now. So let's be very clear. So yes, I'm not surprised that they're saying this. This was a dream of theirs. They're going on about from the river to the Nile, whereas the Zionist mantra has always been from the Euphrates to the Nile. So they have aspirations in the region. If it's down to the Zionists, they would like to take other lands, Lebanon, including Syria, including Iraq, and create this greater Israel that they see as their homeland. And trying to move 2.4 million Palestinians, or to evict them, literally, that's what it is, evict them from their territory, from their land, having performed a first Nakba where they evicted 800,000 in those days, 800,000 plus in those days. Well, that is a Holocaust, that is ethnic cleansing, that is internationally illegal under every international law and under Geneva Conventions. And if they think that the Palestinians this time are going to abide by that, then they've got something else coming. That no Palestinian is going to leave that land. No Arab country is going to take those people, whether the quota is 1 or 10 or 20,000. Arab countries that took Palestinian refugees in the past and still have them to this day, and have learned the hard way that Israel, whatever the promises of the world at the time, the right of return is not being granted to the Palestinians, and no one is going to repeat this mistake again. It's not about having the Palestinians or not. It's about they will not allow for the Palestinians to be eradicated again and kicked out of the country again and turned into refugees one more time in history. This cannot be accepted.
No, absolutely not. And I wanted to talk to you as well about the outrageous, never before actually seen numbers of journalists murdered in cold blood by Israel since October 7th. So to date, the numbers are at 60 Palestinian journalists and 3 now Lebanese journalists that have been killed in these airstrikes. So Hala, considering the consistent risks that journalists are facing right now, it might be one of the most dangerous careers at all right now. Why do you think that it's acceptable that there's such a notable absence of international intervention or efforts to protect journalists in the conflict zone? We have a couple of pictures here that maybe we could bring up of the 2 Lebanese journalists that were killed yesterday, Farah Omar and Rabi Al-Mimari, I hope I say that correctly. They were wearing press vests and their car clearly had the word press on it. So how can they so directly and intentionally murder journalists that are trying to do their jobs? And how can this internationally not cause more outrage? And I guess a follow-up question is, could journalists maybe across the world lead, sort of an initiative here to create kind of a global campaign aimed at safeguarding these journalists reporting from Palestine or from Lebanon?
Okay, I am a journalist myself, been one forever, as far as I can remember in my professional career anyway. And I remember when we first started, we didn't even have, this thing about flak jackets and helmets did not exist. Only the army wore those. It was inconceivable for any journalist. We used to go to front lines as well. Lebanon was occupied. We had the Israelis, they were fighting, and we were on front lines, and without this kind of protection. But we never felt in those days that journalists were targeted. Sure, journalists got killed, but you got killed being in the wrong place at the wrong time, the wrong place, etc., etc. But as the years came, and from Iraq onwards, now journalists are becoming the target, in particular in areas like Gaza, in areas like Iraq as well when we were there. But as far as the Israelis are concerned, and as far as the rest of the world, like I said, I was a journalist, and it's sad to see that I remember when Marie Colvin was killed, and she was killed while covering Syria. And I remember I was actually off work because I had lost my husband like 50 days before that. And I was in mourning, and I was at my parents' home in Beirut, just to get myself together after that. And I remember waking up and reading the news that Marie Colvin was killed in Syria. So I checked with the office, and they said it looks like it. And then I made arrangements to go and collect her body, and it took weeks to do that, but we managed to do it and fly her out and identify her, etc., etc. And Marie was not just a colleague, she was a friend as well. And I've never spoken about this publicly for reasons. However, there was so much coverage, and Marie was a big name, and Marie was one of the greatest journalists, and Marie was a fantastic journalist, and whichever way you want to look. And yes, she was known and she was famous. But the media, the coverage about Marie's death was just, wow, amazing, beyond, And now I come and I'm sitting here watching all this happening, and I'm watching 60 Palestinians, 60 plus actually, because in the last 2 days since the 60, there've been another 2 or 3 from Gaza that have been killed. So we're looking probably at 63 now, aside from the Lebanese ones. I'm looking at 60 plus Palestinians, journalists, killed in broad daylight, again, under the watch of everybody, in real time. And they make the news, but they make, an item of news. There's no outrage. There's no the world gets together and demands, to find the culprits like they did in Syria. There are no sanctions because they killed, imposed because, this is called, murder. There's nothing of the sort. It's just a news item. And by tomorrow, it's forgotten. And I'll tell you what, they're locals, they're natives, they're brown skills, and they don't matter as far as the rest of the world is concerned. 15,000 Palestinians have not mattered. So why are we surprised that the 60 journalists matter? Yes, they do a profession. Journalism is not a crime. And everyone that dies, I feel a piece of me shatters inside, because this is my profession. This is me. This could be me or any of my colleagues, and I wouldn't want it on anyone, because we are there on those front lines, not because we really like to take danger or to experience it, but because we are bringing you, we hope we're bringing you a part of the truth, or a side of the truth, so that, you know, you guys who are sitting at home watching TV at night, you get it from us, and we're not supposed to be killed like this. Then, so they're being targeted. Israel does not like the fact that these journalists, like I said earlier, the coverage has been real, it's been real time, it's on our live televisions every single day, or at least not the television, at least on our social media, on our phones, on Twitter, on Spaces, because the Palestinians on the ground now hold their cameras and film everything and literally send it to us directly. Do you think Israel wants us to see this? The outrage, the public outrages happen in the world, you know, the demonstrations, the protests from the UK to the States to all around every country in the world that is allowed, okay? Why did this happen? Because people are waking up and are actually seeing it. They're seeing these images. No human being can accept watching babies, you know, being killed right in front of their eyes. No human being can accept watching children being slaughtered. No human being can watch seeing Gaza being, you know, eradicated and people killed like it's like an abattoir, literally. You know, no one can accept that. So people are taken to the streets because, so who's delivering this message to them? It's the Palestinian journalists with the live feed and the live television who are risking their lives to send us these images, because we as international correspondents cannot be there, or as journalists, Western journalists cannot be inside. So we're relying on them. They're showing us firsthand what's happening. They're our eyewitnesses, and they're not lying, because you cannot, these images are not a lie, okay? So they're being targeted, so it shuts down, so we don't get to see this truth. So we moved to Lebanon, 3 journalists that we're covering, and on both occasions, the areas they were at was not, there were no skirmishes happening, there was no fighting going on between the sides. And Israel targeted those journalists. And on both occasions, killed 3 journalists. Yesterday, it was Al-Mayadeen. Well, Israel has a big issue with Mayadeen, because they regard Mayadeen as a close ally of Hezbollah and Iran. So they eliminated, and they've actually recently banned or trying to stop Mayadeen from broadcasting in the Palestinian, in Israel and some of the territories that they control. So, and we know from, again, let's not take our words. We will always know that it's a target attack, but people don't believe it. But an official in the Pentagon who does the military side, who spoke to the New York Times yesterday, and he said this particular drone doesn't exist with the Lebanese army. We'll come back to, I keep on saying we'll come back to the Lebanese army in a minute, but actually we don't have it in Lebanon. So this is a drone that came from Israel. They have it, and it's actually, the worst part of it, it's a drone where they can actually see what the target is, they can monitor it, they can see it, and if they want, they can abort the attack, but they chose not to. So that means they were targeted. And yes, it's to shut down us getting firsthand news, firsthand accounts from people on the ground. That's how I interpret it. And no one is going to convince us. You know, you can kill a journalist by mistake, and this happens. None of us that have covered war fronts guarantee that we will always be safe. We know we're taking a risk. We understand that, and we accept it. And we try on the ground to judge how much of the risk we take. And we know sometimes we will, you know, we may be shot, we may be injured, or we can die. But we don't go on the front line thinking we're going to be targeted, and it's not acceptable. We're not there to be targeted. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I speak passionately about it.
No, of course, I completely understand, Hala. It's absolutely unacceptable, and you're completely right. I think they've done a phenomenal campaign to dehumanize Palestinians to such an extent where just nobody matters, everyone's fair game. I've never seen this in my life. So many journalists killed in such a short amount of time. So it really is, it's very heartbreaking, because as you said, journalism is not a crime. Talking about media bias, have you seen this kind of amount of propaganda just being spewed out by Israel and debunked in real time as it has ever before? because it's just absolutely insane. I don't even understand how we have 60 or more news stories that have come out that have then been debunked, and the world still can't see what's happening. I mean, is it willful ignorance? What is it?
No, certainly it's not ignorance. Yeah, I've seen, I don't think we've seen it as much. I think, you see, again, in the past, before social media and before X and Spaces and all that, it wasn't, we didn't, you know, in the earlier days, there wasn't as much social media. So you didn't get to see much, except, like I said, the journalists that are on the ground, whatever war zone they're covering or whatever story they're covering, you read them in newspapers. That was it. You read them in newspapers, got them on your television, you know, BBC, ITV, Channel 4. I'm talking British here, you know, your version in the States or whatever, CNN, etc., etc. Now you have social media and you know, the narratives, you know, Israel seems to have fallen back. In the past, actually, whatever Israel said was taken as, you know, gospel. Israel said, you know, they're terrorists. Fine, they're terrorists. Israel said we captured, you know, 1,000 terrorists. Yes, you captured 1,000 terrorists. Now you have social media. You have independent media. You have people that, you have a generation that actually does not trust the mainstream media anymore because most of it follows a narrative. And most of it is actually, you know, too scared to go out bluntly and say, you know, actually, no, Israel is wrong on this occasion. So you have independent journalism, you have social media where people are looking, searching for alternative news, alternative sources, and actually reading the history a bit more and watching and seeing. I mean, you know, you cannot, you know, the images alone tell you a story. So Israel is losing the PR, but the problem is, I think, in its head, it's kind of stuck somewhere. It's like in a time warp somewhere, and it hasn't developed it because, I mean, some of these things that they've put out, I mean, seriously, if it wasn't so sad, if it wasn't so funny, I mean, it wasn't so sad, it's funny because it is funny. I mean, it reminds me of Iraq when we had, everybody made fun of him. What was his name? Comical Ali, who stood in front of us, literally, all of us, the journalists, and saying, you know, no, the Americans have not occupied Baghdad, and the tanks were literally behind him. I mean, this is exactly the kind of same similarity that the Israelis are doing with their audios. That, you know, they bring these, you know, there's an actress that does, you know, this video that they did about the hospital, and I mean, they can't even get the accent. You know, we are Arabs, we know accents, we know the different dialects in Palestine or Lebanon or Syria, etc., etc. We can tell who's saying what. Or the audios, you know, I mean, Hamas that undertook a huge incursion into Israel that took years to plan, right? It's two guys are going to talk on the phone and he's going to tell the other one, by the way, it's behind you in the cemetery. I mean, some of it just, it's logic. It's a 5-year-old would debunk it, let alone people who know a little bit better. So they've fallen behind. Their media narratives failed as well. And the sad part is, no, I don't think that the Western governments don't know this. They're not ignorant. Let's be very clear. You know, politicians are not that, I mean, some of them are, but they're not all stupid. And they have advisors and experts around them. So they have no excuse whatsoever to pretend ignorance if that's the case. But they want to ignore it because, again, they are supporting Israel. They have said it right from day one. They stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, guess what? Yes, everybody in life has the right to defend themselves. But the difference between defending yourself and an open license to kill, and that's what they gave Israel, a free rein to go and carry out a slaughter, and they can't rein her now, or they don't want to rein her. So the question is, and I'm going to coin a phrase from Bassem, what is the exchange rate? Crass, but what is the exchange rate? How many more 1,000 Palestinians before they call it a day and say enough is enough? What is the exchange rate?
Yeah, what is it? We'd all love to know. It's been a phenomenal conversation with you, Hala. I have a closing question. You give us just your perspective on what you think is next for the entire conflict. You know, longer kind of outlook. Where do you think we're headed here? From here, sorry.
Well, look, one thing this whole thing has made possible is actually shed, you know, shed light again on the Palestinian cause, which somehow has been shelved and forgotten. And as always, every few years it comes back to, and then they shelve it and it collects dust and everybody forgets about it. Well, hold on. There's a population, there's a people with rights, there's a people who's been forgotten, there's a people who are looking for a state of their own. So if anything, this has brought the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian cause, back to the arena, to the limelight. And I don't think after the losses, and we're talking huge losses, I don't think after what's happened in Gaza, I don't think this is something that's going to be allowed to be shelved again. And let's discuss it in a few days in a few years when the next round happens. Either now this is, and I don't have the answer, but they need to, the world has to help once they agree on what the exchange rate and they end it and they say enough is enough, which usually they do. Enough is enough, Israel. Once that happens, then they have to sit down and figure a way of how to move forth. How do they then move forth? How do they give the Palestinians their rights? How do they create the state? How do they allow for it to happen? How do they both take time to mourn, to grieve, to move on, and to down the line, because it's going to be very hard to build bridges. But if Israel believes for 1 second that it's going to eradicate Hamas, there's a whole generation of children that we're watching now that are under attack in Gaza, relentless attack, that have lost so much already, that have lost family. There's a generation growing up with anger. They've seen their moms, their dads, their siblings being killed in front of them. This is your new generation. If this is not resolved now, you have another, whatever it takes, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, there's a generation that's coming that will demand to revenge what happened and will demand again to fight for their freedom. So now is a good time to look at all this and see how they call it a day, but they discuss a resolution for the Palestinian issue and how they move forth. The details is really not for us to say or to suggest or to even discuss. Well, we can discuss it. It's for the Palestinians to decide. It's their right. It's about them. It's always been about them. And it's for Israel to try and to understand once and for all that it cannot sustain itself as is. The status quo cannot be sustained, and it has to make compromises.
Well, Hala, it's been an amazing conversation, but we have an amazing conversation every day. We just got this one we got to share with everybody on video. If you guys have more questions for Hala, you can almost always find her in our spaces.
Yes.
She's always receptive to our questions. So Hala, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you and what you're up to and where they can find your work?
So I am, like Sarah just said, I'm currently, I'm on, mostly I come late at night and detox at Sarah's, which is a beautiful space where we can all talk, debate, discuss, ask, sometimes be sad, sometimes be angry, but it's okay. And we just, try and support each other, but also try and learn. And at the end of the day, try and analyze what's happened during the day. And there are lots of different spaces happening. It depends what you want, what you're looking for. I thought I was sort of retiring from journalism, and I have. I'm no longer doing front lines, and I've done my bit. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirts for it, have 6 awards on my shelves. And I've written 2 books, as it was introduced at the beginning. One was about Hezbollah and the other one was about Iraq, but it's rather than doing a political one, I did it my way, with the Iraqi book. It's one story that told the story of Iraq, basically, but it's also a personal story. And yes, I'm looking to write some more. And I keep on saying, I don't want to get involved anymore. I don't want to be engaged anymore. I took time out of Twitter for a very long time, and then October 7 happened, and I find myself back fighting. And until this is settled, we will all be fighting together. You cannot turn your back. There are other ways, just, if you're not on the front line, doesn't mean that, it ends there. You can share your experiences, you can talk about it, but also you can debunk and question and just keep on defending, supporting, and talking about it. People should not forget this. We must keep on talking about Gaza and Palestine. Even when the dust settles, we cannot let it just be forgotten again and shelved until the next round. We have to continue talking about it. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me at Sarah's. Sometimes I float into other spaces just for the fun of it, to see what others, because it's
and then you come
it's
right
important.
to
And I come right back to you, because some of it is like so toxic. I think, oh my God, where is Sarah? I need a detox now.
So come to our safe spaces where we are around. Well, thank you, Hala. We will definitely.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for the trust.
Women in journalism were more important than you think. So if you want to support us, you can like, share, and subscribe to the stream. You can also visit DDGeopolitics.com to find out where we are located on all platforms. Our Substack is back up and running with various articles and a new editor. So please check that out. And on Sunday, we will be having Kit Clarenberg to discuss Ukraine again. Thank you again, guys, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you.